Welcome to the Supernatural Japan podcast, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of myths, legends, and folklore from Japan, and sometimes other places as well. I'm your host, Kevin O'Shea, a Japanese folklore enthusiast, and today we're diving into a chilling tale of one of Japan's most infamous urban legends, the Kuchisake-onna, or the Slit-Mouthed Woman. Let's get things started with a little story. The streets of Kyoto were eerily quiet that night, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. A soft drizzle fell, painting the cobblestones with a slick sheen that reflected the dim glow of the streetlights. Naoki, a college student, walking home from a late study session, quickened his pace as the feeling of being watched prickled the back of his neck. He'd heard the urban legends. Everyone in Japan had. Stories of the Kuchisake-onna, the slit-mouthed woman who roamed the streets, appearing to lone travelers. But legends were just that. Stories to keep kids from wandering too far late at night. At least that's what Naoki told himself as he rounded the corner into a narrow alleyway. The sound of light footsteps behind him made him stop in his tracks. His breath hitched as he turned slowly. She was there. A woman under a flickering street lamp, her long dark hair plastered to cover her pale face from the rain. She wore a white surgical mask, the kind everyone carried during flu season, and a beige trench coat that reached her knees. "Am I beautiful?" she asked, her voice soft, yet echoing unnaturally in the empty alley. Naoki chuckled nervously, trying to mask his unease. "Yeah, sure, you look fine." The woman tilted her head slightly, her hands slipping into her pockets of her coat. She stepped closer, her movements unnaturally smooth, like she was gliding over the wet ground. Naoki took a step back, his instinct screaming at him to run. "Even now?" she asked. Before he could respond, she pulled down the mask, revealing a ghastly smile. Her mouth was slit from ear to ear, the flesh jagged and raw, as though it had been carved with a dull blade. Her grin was too wide, too sharp, her teeth glinting like tiny daggers. Naoki stumbled backward, his heart hammering in his chest. The stories were true. Kuchisake-onna was real. "Am I beautiful now?" she asked again, her voice dripping with malice. Naoki's mind raced. He remembered the tales his grandmother used to tell him. If you said yes, she would carve your face to match hers. If you said no, she would kill you on the spot. He tried to think of the third option, something that might buy him time. "You're average?" he blurted out, his voice trembling. For a moment, she froze, as if caught off guard by his response. Her head tilted further, her eyes narrowing. Then she let out a low, guttural laugh that made his blood run cold. "Interesting," she said, her voice like the scrape of metal against stone. "Let's see if you're telling the truth." Before he could react, she lunged at him with terrifying speed, her hand gripping a large pair of scissors that seemed to materialize from nowhere. Naoki dodged the blades, snapping just inches from his face. He sprinted down the alley, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The sound of her laughter followed him, echoing off the walls. "You can't escape me," she called out, her voice growing fainter as he turned corner after corner, desperate to lose her in the maze of alleys. Finally, he burst onto a main street, the bright lights of the convenience store offering a moment of solace. Panting, he stumbled inside and collapsed against the counter. The clerk looked up, startled. "Are you okay?" the clerk asked. Naoki shook his head, unable to find words. His mind was racing, his body trembling from adrenaline. He glanced towards the glass doors, half expecting to see her standing there, but the street outside was empty. The clerk handed him a bottle of water. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Naoki laughed weakly, his hands shaking as he took the bottle. "Something like that," he muttered. And he left the store and made his way home. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was still watching him, waiting for the next time he'd find himself alone. And he was right. So there you have it. Pretty frightening, right? Imagine this. You're walking home alone on a quiet street at night. A woman in a long coat, just like in the story, and a surgical mask approaches you. She stops in front of you and asks, "Am I pretty?" What do you say? If you've ever heard the story of the Kuchisake-onna, you'll know there's no easy answer. But to understand her chilling question, you need to go back in time and uncover the history and evolution of this terrifying figure. The story of Kuchisake-onna is believed to have ancient roots, dating back to Japan's Hainan period over 1,000 years ago. According to legend, she was once a stunningly beautiful woman, married to a jealous samurai. But her beauty became her downfall. The samurai suspected her of infidelity, and in a fit of rage, he slashed her mouth from ear to ear, leaving her disfigured. As he did, he mocked her, saying, Who will think you're beautiful now?" The horrific act of violence turned her into an onryo, which is a vengeful spirit, doomed to wander the earth. With her grotesque, permanent smile, she began to haunt those she encountered, seeking validation and revenge. But the legend doesn't stop there. Kuchisake-onna's story resurfaced in a new form in the late 20th century, becoming one of Japan's most notorious urban legends. In the 1970s, there were a wave of reports claiming that a woman with a surgical mask was stalking children in cities and rural towns. The story would go that she would approach her victims and ask, "Am I pretty?" If they answered yes, she would remove her mask, revealing her mutilated mouth. Then she would ask again, "Am I pretty now?" If the victim said no, she would kill them with a pair of scissors. If they said yes, she would slash their mouths to make them look just like her. Now let's look at the symbolism and cultural context here for a moment. The story of Kuchisake-onna reflects deeper societal anxieties. Now, there is the fear of vanity and beauty standards. Her origin story critiques excessive focus on physical appearance. There's also urban paranoia. In the 1970s, as Japanese cities became more crowded and modernized, urban legends like the Kuchisake-onna embodied fears of strangers and crime in impersonal urban settings. And there are folklore adaptations. Like many yokai stories, Kuchisake-onna serves as a cautionary tale, warning children not to talk to strangers. Okay, so how does one escape Kuchisake-onna, or the Slit-Mouthed Woman? Well, over time, strategies to escape Kuchisake-onna have become part of the lore. First, there is confusion. If you respond to her question in an ambiguous answer like, "You're average," she may become confused, giving you time to escape. That's what happened with Naoki in the story at the beginning of the podcast. Candy. Offering candy, especially hard candies, beko ame, is said to distract her. And then reversing the question, asking her something like, "Do you think I'm pretty?" might also stall her. So, the resurgence of Kuchisake-onna in the 1970s reflects more than just a fear of ghosts. It's tied to deeper societal anxieties. During that time, Japan was rapidly modernizing, and urban legends like hers captured the fears about crime and strangers and the loss of community in an increasingly urbanized world. Her surgical mask, which might seem eerie to some, was a common sight in Japan, used to prevent the spread of illness, and her image is a mix of familiar and the horrifying. That made her particularly an unsettling figure. So, of course, we know that in the pandemic years around the world, surgical masks became very commonplace for people everywhere to wear. But if you spend any time in Japan pre-pandemic, you will notice that, Japanese people tend to wear surgical masks when they are sick or they're preventing sickness or avoiding sickness. So now, over the years, Kuchisake-onna has cemented her place in Japanese pop culture. She's appeared in movies, manga, and even video games, evolving from a localized ghost story to an internationally recognized figure of horror. Her tale reminds us of the power of folklore to adapt and endure, reflecting the fears and values of the time. So, what would you do If you found yourself face to face with Kuchisake-onna, would you run, offer her candy, or try to outsmart her with a clever answer? Well, one thing's for sure, her story lingers in the back of the mind, a chilling reminder to be wary of strangers on quiet, lonely streets. And that's it for today's episode of the Supernatural Japan podcast. If you enjoyed the legend of Kuchisake-onna, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. We are on Amazon, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those important places, and others as well. And if there's a myth, ghost, or urban legend that you want me to cover, let me know. You can find me on Instagram at Supernatural Japan. Thanks for all the people who've been coming over there. Lots of photos. If you're wondering what Kuchisake-onna looks like, there'll be some different interpretations of that over on the Instagram, of course, and different things as well, reels, moments, all those fun things. You can also find me on Blue Sky and X at Mad for Maple. There's an email. You want to email the show, email us at supernaturaljapan@gmail.com, and also check out the Facebook page. There is a link in the show notes. And that's it for another episode of the Supernatural Japan podcast. Until next time, stay curious and maybe carry some candy in your pocket, just in case.